This is Pacific Mornings with Will.
Maloelele, welcome to Pacific Mornings on 5:31 I'm William Teresi. It's brilliant to be in your company this morning. Hoping you're having a lovely start to the day, by the way. Now, November 2024, Dr. Melissa Derby started a 5-year term as New Zealand's Race Relations Commissioner. As well as her connections to Ngāti Ranginui, she brings an impressive academic background, including a PhD in early literacy and human development, Fulbright research in the United States, where she studied Martin Luther King Jr. That's extraordinary, and teaching and research roles at the University of Waikato. Now, alongside her leadership in education and literacy, she also served on ministerial advisory groups and community boards with a strong focus on Māori education and success. This morning, Melissa Derby joins us to tell us all about her first year in the role, her priorities for tackling racism and discrimination, how Pacific communities can make use of the Commission's services, as well as her response to recent incidents of racism in Aotearoa. A very good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
You studied at Columbia University and conducted research into Martin Luther King Jr. I'd be keen to perhaps start there in terms of looking back. How has that shaped perhaps your perspective on race relations and social justice in New Zealand?
Yes. No, I did. I was very fortunate enough to have a couple of stints in America. I actually read my first book on Martin Luther King Jr. aged 11 that I got out from the school library and haven't really stopped since. I've found his, ability to love in the face of such extreme hatred always really, really fascinating. And obviously the remarkable achievements that he had in terms of the civil rights movement in America, again, have always fascinated me. When I was in between, my master's and PhD, I was lucky enough to study at Columbia University, where I spent more time, to be fair, in the Institute for the Study of Human Rights, looking at the Declaration, Universal Declaration on the rights of Indigenous peoples in particular, but went back to the US to follow the civil rights trail that Martin Luther King that he sort of created and carved out during his lifetime through all the southern states of America with my then 4-year-old son. A pretty epic road trip, that's for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. Look, I just want to dig into the PhD, which focused on children's early brain developments and the importance of reading. How do you see, say, education contributing to a stronger, more inclusive community?
Biased. I'll say that up front in terms of education, but I see it as crucial. It's, when I was at Columbia, looking at human rights in particular, I was really fascinated to learn that the concept of literacy is actually a human right in and of itself, separate to that of education. So I brought that kind of thinking, back to my PhD, which was part of a Better Start National Science Challenge, one of the big challenges funded by MV at the time. And really started to argue, and I don't believe anyone else in the country at the time was taking this kind of angle, but really started to argue that literacy is a human right. It's a skill we acquire, but it's a tool we use throughout our life to access other human rights, to improve our outcomes as individuals, as communities, really to get the best life we possibly can. And when you sort of look at it through that perspective, it changes the conversation. I think it makes us hopefully more urgent in our actions in terms of improving literacy for every child in this country as best as we can.
Sure, and look, let's turn our attention now to the role that you're in. What experiences or what, ultimately made you decide to go for the role?
That's a good question. I had somebody ask me the other day, look, how did you sort of get to where you are? And often it's from other people suggesting I do things. And this role came across my sort of pathway, I suppose. And look, it's in my nature to not turn down such an extraordinary opportunity, really, to serve our country in this way. It's a huge privilege to have this role. I want to do my absolute best for every single community in this country. Building strong relationships, at least in the initial term, is key to me in that regard. And so I've been really lucky to get out, meet with a range of communities across the country, and do my best to ensure we all get along as best as we can, and to really call out racism and discrimination when we see it.
And you are in the role at a remarkable time, some would argue, politically speaking as well. Race relations, some would argue, is at a boiling point, given the agenda that's been pursued at government level, but also rhetoric that's spinning about online. What do you make of the current state of race relations in this country?
Great question. And look, I've been in the role for 9 months and really hit the ground running this year. I've seen a mixture. So, on the one hand, we are divided, particularly on public discourse and political rhetoric. And there's that sense, I guess, that social cohesion, I suppose, is breaking down. And obviously, if that happens, things don't end well for anybody, anyone in the mix. And human rights certainly go out the window. So, I don't think that we should be relaxed about it. But on the other hand, I've seen some really wonderful community events and initiatives that bring people together from a range of different backgrounds, in particular the interfaith space. One of my portfolios within the Commission is to look after the rights for religious and faith communities. And I've been really lucky to attend a load of events where we see different people from different backgrounds come together, I guess, on shared values. So there is some hope that while we are divided in many parts of the country, and others we're not, there is a real desire among a lot of communities to meet with their neighbours, to know people who are different to them, to connect with people from different backgrounds. So I guess my question in my role and what I want to do as best as I can is how do we make that happen so that we counter some of the divisive rhetoric that certainly occurs online, certainly occurs in sort of political spaces and public discourse, and make sure that we look after the country that we're all pretty fortunate to live in.
Can you give me a sense of the power in which you wield? And as you pointed out there, that there are political leaders. I mean, our Deputy Prime Minister at the moment, David Seymour, through the credit of himself, I mean, he's very upfront. He wants to pursue a one-based system. How much power do you have to stamp out or try and put a stop to rhetoric that some would argue is inflammatory?
On the context, so sort of within the mandate that I have, it's about promoting sort of human rights and protecting human rights, and certainly calling out instances of racism or, I guess, threats to the harmonious relations that we all have, and certainly I intend to do that as much as I can to the best of my ability. The Commission, and this is a widely, I guess, misinterpreted fact of the Commission or aspect of the Commission, is we don't have an investigative role. So I can't go out there and kind of investigate and make findings in terms of any breach of the Human Rights Act or anything, as much as I'd love to at times. So that's something that I guess the public often think that I can do, which unfortunately I can't. But certainly when there are instances of racism or discrimination, we encourage community members to come to the Commission, to contact us on our info line, and to make those make us aware of those instances so that we can see trends and release perhaps proactive initiatives to combat it, make public statements, whatever the case may be. And certainly I can advocate and lobby in the background.
Yeah. Where do you feel progress has perhaps been made in addressing systemic racism, and where do you see the biggest challenges ahead?
I think we've done a really good job in this country of addressing the inequities that people face. Look, we're not perfect, and so I want to make that really clear at the outset, but we have done some things. We're moving in some areas in the right direction. I think we've got great programs in education that target groups who have been underrepresented for a long time, and I certainly worked in that space a lot in terms of Māori education and promoting some of those programs. We've got people who are committed to recognising that diversity in a workspace is a good thing. And that doesn't just mean, obviously, diversity in the context of, ethnicity or religion or sexuality and so on, but also a diverse range of ideas around in a room is often a good thing. I think we also, in leadership, we can do better. There's research that came out recently where people of different ethnic backgrounds would get to a certain point, particularly in the public service, and then find it very hard to make their way into leadership roles. So how can we better address that so that we see, everybody sees themselves reflected in the story of this country and what goes on in this country? I think that's really important.
Yeah, certainly. Look, Pacific communities often face subtle or overt discrimination. Kind of what work has your office done with Pacific people over the past year, and how do you plan to perhaps strengthen that engagement going forward?
In a number of ways. So I was really fortunate early on in my term to have a United Nations report due later this year, when I will actually be going to Geneva to report on it, which is about the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So New Zealand, we report against how we're doing with that every so often, and it's this year that it's come up. So that was really lucky for me. It took me into communities really early on in my role with a really deliberate thing to ask communities about, and that included Pacific communities. So I met with a range of Pacific leaders, whether it was through churches, whether it was through, Pacific sort of activist type groups, who were able to share with me their experiences in this country with regards to discrimination. Uh, they shared certainly a concern around a range of areas, whether it was education, health, housing. It was a big thing, and certainly employment was as well, with regards to things like the migrant worker exploitation,
Sure.
or the seasonal workers that perhaps affect Pacific communities more than other communities. So, a colleague of mine, the EEO commissioner, works very specifically in that area. The commission in the past has done some really good work with Pacific communities, particularly with regards to the Pacific pay gap, and we're hoping to continue to build on that. I've attended some wonderful Pacific events. Pacifica was definitely a favourite. And I've also, encountered a lot of Pacific groups in the interfaith space, which is really nice to see Pacific churches and so on involved in that space as well, alongside, Jewish groups, Muslim groups, Christian, and so on.
I want to get your reaction. This is just one classic example, I think, of racism in this country being pretty ugly. And I'm talking about Air New Zealand's new chief executive appointments.
Yes.
Just the absolute scrutiny and vitriol that the new chief executive has been under is disgusting, frankly. What do you make of it?
I couldn't agree more. I think it shows a really narrow, sort of quite archaic view of who is a New Zealander, and I
Sure.
think we need to change that. New Zealand is increasingly diverse. Auckland, I believe, is one of the most diverse cities possibly in the world, but certainly in our part of the world. And the more that we understand that, a lot of community groups, a lot of different ethnic groups, in particular faith groups and so on, have been in this country for a very long time, some dating back to the 19th century, we will start to shift our view, hopefully, of who we see as a New Zealander. That doesn't mean that you have to have been in this country for a long time to be a New Zealander. Some are very recent arrivals, equally entitled to belong here and to feel included in this country. So one of the things that we are doing as a new board, other commissioners were appointed at the same time as me, as a national human rights action plan. Part of my role in that is really bringing my storytelling background, I guess, to the work that I'm doing now, looking at how we can tell better stories about the communities that make up this country, about the country that we live in, and how we can look after each other so that we can continue, or at least head in the right direction as far as ensuring everybody sees themselves reflected and included in the story of this country. So I'm hoping that initiatives like that will go some way to combating the quite vile rhetoric that emerged, unfortunately, with regard to the Mr. Abhishankar's appointment to the new, the role of CEO.
Yeah, certainly. Again, I just want to pick up on another example of this, and perhaps we dig in a wee bit deeper. In terms of, similarly, there was a university student that was subjected to a racist remark at an Auckland comedy night, for example. In both these cases, public forums and social media became platforms for harmful behaviour, and it continues to be, right? This is the big question at the end of the day, how do we balance free speech with the need to protect people from racial abuse?
Great question, and a really topical, issue at this time in our country, and particularly, I think, with the rise of social media, where I would like to think at least some of the hateful things we see online, people wouldn't say to somebody's face in the same way. Other behaviours, I guess, then kick into play. Look, freedom of expression is a fundamental human right, and the position of the Commission has always been that the threshold for speech turning criminal, if you like, is high because it's such a fundamental human right. However, just because we can say something legally doesn't mean we should say something, and I think that's a really important message to get out there. Other things hopefully kick into play, like common decency, seeing our shared humanity and the like, and just behaving better to to our fellow human beings. I think that I don't want to sound Pollyanna about it, but
Sure.
I think they're messages that we need to be reminded of, unfortunately, every now and again. I see education as playing a pretty key role. Again, I'm probably biased in that area, but, how can we understand the harmful impact that racist rhetoric can have on people, while I guess protecting this fundamental human right is certainly a topic that I think we need to be better about addressing, more deliberate about it, so that people aren't subjected to such vile rhetoric, but so that we can all ensure that, we are able to think and express different ideas.
Certainly. Look, before we wrap it up, nearly a year into your role, I mean, when you look 5 years ahead from now, what perhaps concrete changes would you like to be able to point to and say, this is how race relations in New Zealand have improved?
Ideally, I'll do myself out of a job. Ideally, I'll do such a good job that we no longer need a race relations commissioner calling out racist rhetoric. Look, that's probably why not aim high, but
Sure.
Who knows if I can achieve that. Come back to me in 5 years' time. But I hope that, I want to be a voice that brings people together. I don't want to be a voice that adds to more division in this country. It might be very hard sometimes to be in a room and find just that one bridge that brings people together. But what I've heard so far from communities is that people want to get to know one another. People want to mix with their neighbours, mix with their colleagues, mix with people from a different background. I think we can do a better job at spotlighting all of the really good things that are happening in this country as far as community initiatives are concerned. It'd be great to get some positive news stories out there around some of these things. I'm hoping that at the very least I don't make things worse, and that I encourage people to look after each other and look after the country that we're lucky to live in. Like I said, we're not perfect, but we certainly enjoy rights and freedoms that few countries around the world enjoy, and making sure that we are deliberate about looking after each other in this country, I think is really important.
Couldn't agree more. That was our Race Relations Commissioner, Dr. Melissa Derby. Have a good rest of your day. Malo pito.
Kia ora. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're listening to Pacific Mornings on 5:31 p.m. I'll be back with you in just a moment. Stick around.